This week's Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, comes out, so I decided to rank all 10 Star Wars movies from the worst to the best. Number 10 on my list is Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Now, I know this is an unpopular opinion, and full disclosure, The Last Jedi is written, directed, and acted better than the next two on my list. But I couldn't stand the direction they took this movie. I'm not one of those guys that says, they ruined my childhood. But the direction they took this movie was disappointing, and a lot of it just didn't make sense. Let's start off by talking about the characters. In the last movie, Rey's character was written to have a very mysterious past, and parents that would really explain her natural talent in the Force. But this movie just tosses that aside, which frankly makes her a bit of a Mary Sue character. And then it also takes Snoke, an interesting villain, and just kills him off. It takes Luke Skywalker, a man who would never give up, and places him on a planet where he just hides and mopes around. The movie does nothing with Finn and Poe. Finn goes on a useless expedition with the new character Rose, an insanely obnoxious character, by the way, and Poe is forced to take a back seat. They try to give him a character arc, but it just falls flat for me. On top of that, this movie makes up 40 new rules about the Force that goes against what we've seen in previous movies. Like I said before, it's a quality-made movie, no doubt. And I know a lot of people really liked it, but it just doesn't resonate with me. Number 9 on my list is Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Now, it's no secret that the Phantom Menace left a lot of Star Wars fans bitter. So George Lucas attempted to right a lot of the wrongs from the Phantom Menace. But it seemed like for every one step forward, he took 2 steps back with Attack of the Clones. Yes, there's far less Jar Jar. Yes, there's far less Senate meetings. But this movie has a very awkward story structure. The story sets up certain elements in a very forced way. There's no real logical reason to split up Anakin and Obi-Wan. It's just obvious that they're split up to push Anakin and Padme's romance along with Anakin and Obi-Wan's resentment. And speaking of Anakin and Padme's romance, it involves some brutal dialogue. And when you combine that with Hayden Christensen's wooden performance, it just makes for scenes that are barely watchable. With all that said, what makes Attack of the Clones better than The Last Jedi is the fact that it knows its place in its respective trilogy. It took the foundation of the Phantom Menace and it built off of it. Now, what it built, yes, may have been disappointing, but at least it was structured. The Last Jedi took the foundation of The Force Awakens and only built off a handful of bricks of The Force Awakens. And that is a structure that's just bound to collapse. So for me, that's what makes Attack of the Clones better than The Last Jedi. Number 8 on my list is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now, for a lot of people, this is their least favorite Star Wars movie, and I totally get it. The story is a mess. Having young Anakin Skywalker doesn't pay off the way George Lucas wanted it to. The Gungans were annoying, and the Senate meetings were basically C-SPAN with aliens. But what makes this movie take my number 8 spot ahead of Attack of the Clones is there's some fun to be had with it, and frankly, some nostalgia that makes it more enjoyable to watch for me. I actually really did like Qui-Gon Jinn. Liam Neeson played the role very well, and he's a bit of a Mr. Miyagi-like character in this movie. He's a surrogate father to Anakin, he's wise, and he can really throw down. I also liked Darth Maul, and the fight with him at the end of this movie is one of the most satisfying lightsaber duels in the Star Wars saga. Now, there's a big gap between my bottom 3 and the rest of the movies on this list, so with that said, let's get into number 7. Number 7 on my list is Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now, I would define almost every aspect of Solo: A Star Wars Story as good, but not great. There's nothing that stands out as bad in this movie, but there's nothing that stands out as spectacular either. The cast all does a good job. Alden Ehrenreich, Emilia Clarke, Woody Harrelson, and Paul Bettany all did a fine job in their respective roles. And come on, Donald Glover nailed the role of Lando. But the biggest negative I have with this movie is it bogs itself down by pushing the Han Solo nostalgia on the audience a little too much. No one cared where Han got the dice for the Millennium Falcon, or where Lando got his costume that he wore in Return of the Jedi. I'm a fan of Han Solo nostalgia, but this movie answered a whole lot of questions that no one was asking. But to this movie's credit, I liked how the story was refreshingly different from previous Star Wars movies. Do we need an origin story of Han Solo? No, of course not. But in a movie saga that's frankly starting to feel a little crowded with Rebels vs. Empire and Jedi vs. Sith movies, it's refreshing to get a Star Wars movie that focuses on the smuggler side of that universe. I really would look forward to future installments that explore this side of the Star Wars universe. Again, nothing in this movie was executed spectacularly, but I really think it set up some solid groundwork for a sequel. Number 6 on my list is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. That's right, the original Star Wars. Now, I consider all of the movies in my top 6 to be great movies. Like I said, Solo was good, but not great. Star Wars Episode 4 is a great movie. It has a great story, great cast, it's well directed, and was revolutionary for the time. This movie was, of course, revolutionary because it displayed visual effects that no one had ever seen before. It was groundbreaking for the time. On top of that, this movie has incredible world building, and George Lucas really introduces the audience to a vastly creative universe. The reason it doesn't crack my top 5 is because I have just a few nitpicks. First off, the villains in this movie are basically mustache-twirling villains. Vader and Tarkin are just baddies focused on destroying planets in this movie. Now, don't think I'm hating on Vader. He evolves into one of the most complex and interesting characters in all of cinema. But in this movie, he's fairly one-note. Another nitpick I have is with Mark Hamill's performance. It can be a little rough from time to time. And my final nitpick I have is with the final battle. It just seems like it's a couple minutes too long. With all that said, Episode 4 is a great movie. It's probably the Star Wars movie I've rewatched the most because it's a really good casual watch. I just have a few nitpicks with it that keeps it out of my top 5. Number 5 on my list is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now going into this movie, I really thought it would be a flop. It seemed like a bit of a cash grab, and there was a lot of rumors about reshoots, and it had me nervous. But it turned out to be a great movie. It had an interesting story to tell, and it explored a side of the rebellion that wasn't 100% squeaky clean. And I loved that. On top of having an interesting story, it had great characters, great action, and it fixed a plot hole from Star Wars Episode 4. My only issue with Rogue One is how Saul Guerrero was written. The movie shoves the idea down your throat that he is a super important character and will play a huge role in this movie. The movie was even marketed that way, but the fact is he really doesn't do much. He just shows Jyn a hologram, and by the time you're 2/3 through the movie, you've forgotten all about him. But besides that, Rogue One is a great movie, and that's why it makes my top 5. Number 4 on my list is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Now, Revenge of the Sith is the Star Wars story that everyone wanted to see, and it really feels like the story that George Lucas really wanted to tell. Honestly, everything about this movie works great. It starts off with a great battle sequence and lightsaber duel, and then it moves forward with great character building, and it effectively shows Anakin's fall to the dark side. The opera theater scene with Anakin and Palpatine is one of the greatest scenes in all of Star Wars. And then the scene right before the Mace Windu Darth Sidious duel that involves Anakin and Padme looking at each other from across the city is so effective. The movie continues on with great storytelling and really tragic scenes like the Order 66 scene. The only nitpicks I take away from this movie is the occasional bad dialogue, and the scene that involves Anakin's fall to the dark side seems a little abrupt. The build-up to it is great, but the actual scene itself is just a little abrupt. Few tweaks to the script would have cleared up both of these nitpicks. But overall, Revenge of the Sith is a great movie, and it has my absolute favorite lightsaber duel in all of Star Wars. Number 3 on my list is Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is a really satisfying conclusion to the original trilogy. I love how the story gets very personal and focuses on Luke and Vader. It's executed perfectly and involves very satisfying character arcs for both Luke and Vader. On top of that, the rest of the movie is just a total thrill ride. From the exciting rescue mission at the beginning of the movie, to the battles on Endor, to the battles in space, and the lightsaber duels, this movie is definitely one of the most exciting Star Wars movies. Which is probably why it was my favorite Star Wars movie as a kid, but as an adult, it still holds up really well. The only nitpick I have with this movie is the Ewoks. Yeah, they're kind of dumb, but they don't really derail the movie by any means. They're just, they are what they are. Number 2 on my list is Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens was the first Disney Star Wars movie, and it started off great. This movie brought in a ton of money at the box office, and was for the most part really well received by critics and audiences. And rightfully so. I love this movie. A big criticism of this movie is that the fact that it played it safe and familiar, but I really don't take issue with that. This movie is a logical stepping stone from Return of the Jedi. Let's face it, blowing up the first Death Star barely slowed the Empire down. So it stands to reason that something like the First Order could form after the destruction of the second Death Star. While the story structure feels familiar, the characters do not. Rey, Finn, and Poe are not mirror images of Han, Luke, and Leia. They're very different. Rey is very gifted with the Force, and she's pretty mechanically inclined. Finn is funny, and has an interesting dynamic by being a stormtrooper turned resistance fighter. And Poe is basically John Wick with an X-Wing fighter. And they're all great. Again, I'm not a fan with how the characters were treated in The Last Jedi, but I love them in this movie. My only nitpick with this movie is how Han Solo was written. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea that an old, but still throwing down Han Solo could exist. But what I didn't like is the fact that he is a divorced old Han still running around with Chewie and the Millennium Falcon. It just makes Han kind of like an old divorced high school quarterback still trying to relive his glory days. I would have felt more invested in Han if they kept him married to Leia and kept him as part of the Resistance. But number 1 on my list is Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. The Empire Strikes Back is not only one of the best Star Wars movies ever made, but it's one of the best movies ever made. The story, the action, and the directing is all great. But what truly makes this movie is the writing. The characters in this movie are written brilliantly. Like I said, in A New Hope, Darth Vader was good, but he was just a bit of a mustache-twirling villain. In this movie, they give him so much more depth and really brought the complexities of his character on the forefront, and it's so satisfying. On top of that, Han and Leia's romance is written so well in this movie, and it comes across as so genuine. And lastly, I gotta talk about Luke. The growth of Luke's character is one of the best parts of the original Star Wars trilogy. He goes from a whiny kid who just wants to go to Tashi Station to pick up some power converters, and he grows into a Jedi who is able to not only defeat, but bring out the good in Darth Vader. And the most critical part of Luke's growth happens in this movie, and it's executed flawlessly. I have nothing negative to say about The Empire Strikes Back. It's a phenomenal movie and easily makes my number 1 spot. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to keep yourself updated on future content. My review for Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker will be coming very soon, so stay tuned for that. And remember, Han shot first.